Thank you, Drew, for starting my talk for me. I know, you'd think there was only one mind. So here's the thing. We're talking about Thomas Troward. We're talking about the writings of a man who lived about 100 years ago. And in some cases, it seems like that would be a nice history lesson, but maybe not too relevant for how you're going to get through your week, yes? I mean, a lot of people wrote books 100 years ago that, frankly, I ain't reading. Like the one on marriage advice that just said, you know, keep the children quiet and out of his way when he gets home because he's been working all day. Did anyone else read those? Oh, if you read etiquette lessons from 100 years ago, especially for women, they're hysterical. For one thing, I knew my grandmother's, and I was like, she ain't doing that. But the idea that we can look at other people to relight our own fire because they shine so brightly, those people we consider inspirations and maybe even heroes in our lives, spiritually or otherwise, Thomas Troward would call that a spiritual prototype. Or a mental equivalent is what Ernest Holmes called it. So we get some really basic concepts from people who started this 100 years ago. It worked for them. It worked for our teachers, and it will work for us. We look at other people who are shining, and we say, I don't want to take that away from you, but that's for me. That's for me. If you see a couple who have been madly in love with each other for 40 years, there's your spiritual prototype of a romantic relationship. If you see somebody who is wealthy and generous and happy and very, very, very peaceful in their soul, you can say, that's for me, there's my spiritual prototype, and if it exists in somebody else, it must exist as potential in you. Because we can only see the divine. All we can see in the rest of the world is God. Yes? And why is that? Because God is all there is. So when I talk about the work of some of our forebears, what I'm doing is taking their antiquated language and showing you how the principles behind it still work. And you may have noticed when I talked about Emma Curtis Hopkins and as I talk about Thomas Troward, they both go to the Judeo-Christian tradition for their metaphors, for their truth, as it were. And that's truth with a capital T. If you're new to this teaching, what you'll soon find is that it doesn't matter what tradition the scripture came out of. We read it for the metaphors, not for the history. What we care about really, what works for us, is knowing that, for instance, I was taught that the Bible is the story of a soul, the story of all souls, the growth path that we all go through. And so it gives me kind of a clue as to what my challenges might be that I'm not willing to look at yet. And so, you know that thing about what you're fighting about is not what you're really fighting about? Anyone who's ever been in a relationship knows that one. It's really not about which way the toilet roll goes. Come on, guys. Although, it's all. So we go often, and Thomas Troward often went to what we call the way shower, or the master teacher, also known as Jesus of Nazareth, who was a Christ, one of many. And what Ernest Holmes could not figure out was Jesus was all about love. And as Ernest Holmes' master teacher, if Jesus is all about love, then why do bad things happen to good people? Why is it that it seems like the people I see as bad are getting away with murder, but the people I know to have good hearts who are working really hard can't catch a break? Has anyone ever seen that? Anyone ever watch the news? Seems like all we hear about are the people that we may or may not like getting into trouble. So what Troward first did for Ernest Holmes, and the reason he caught Ernest Holmes' attention was because he answered that question for Mr. Holmes, for Dr. Holmes. And what he said was that we experience God as if it has two different faces. We experience the loving, personal relationship, or at least Ernest Holmes did. Each and every one of us has access to a personal understanding of the divine, a personal God. And if we are willing to have that, it helps us feel the love that God really is, because it's personal. It's a bite-sized chunk. It's hard to love the entire infinite universe all at once and feel personally connected to that. So we have the love, and then we have the law. Browning once wrote that all's love, but all's law. So the divine absolutely is a loving being, and there are laws, natural laws that are at work, just like gravity, that don't care who you are or what you're dropping. I know that the first time I held one of my nieces, I was really afraid of the law of gravity, because she was squirmy. She still is. She's just harder to hold because she's bigger. And the thing is, what we call the law of cause and effect is that impersonal law. It doesn't care who you are or what you have stated you want to create. It just says, okay. Now, the personal divine being, that aspect of the one, might look at you and say, are you sure? That's really what you want to order? The law just said yes. Okay. If you want a jelly bean pizza, okay. If you want broccoli drenched in gasoline, I know, the law will say, okay, and that's what comes out. That's what you create. If you say that you need a relationship that is fraught with drama because it's more interesting, the law does not say, are you sure? Do you remember what happened to your bank account the last time you did this? It just says, okay. And you can create that. We absolutely get to create the world we choose to live in. And so if there is some part of your life that you're just looking at going, no, there's no way I created that. Sorry. The good news is if you created it, you can create something else. And you didn't create it because you're stupid or bad. You just created it because you weren't aware that you had another option. If I told you that I'm doing this exact same talk right now in some big city under much better lights, or I won't say better music because, nice try. But, or with, more comfortable seats with drink rests, and you didn't know that that was going on right now, would it really be your fault for choosing this place? If you much prefer the place with the cup holders? It doesn't really matter which one you go to, does it? I mean, what you come here for is not a cup holder. Although I bought cars based entirely on that. My metaphor got away with me on that one. I'm just going to admit that. So the metaphor that Thomas Troward talks about is Jesus as both shepherd and stone. He's called the Good Shepherd. The shepherd is that love part that talks about, or is the incarnation of, it's a metaphor pointing to that loving presence that guides us to safety, that is always taking care of us. Now, the metaphor doesn't exactly work for me, because what does the shepherd do when he's done taking care of the sheep? He eats them. And that is why I don't like being called a pastor. At some point, that relationship goes way south. Reverend Hannibal Lecter up here. But the metaphor is meant to embrace the side of the divine that lives within us, that is conspiring on our behalf and making the world a better place, because it's part of what gives us the impetus to do anything. Now, Troward also talks about Jesus as the stone that the builders rejected, which has become the cornerstone. And where the shepherd is the love, the stone is the law. When you build a building, it doesn't care what color you're going to paint it. There are certain rules, like don't try and put in the windows before the foundation. It doesn't go well. Don't try to just throw a foundation down and 10 minutes later put the walls in. You got to give it time to settle. And by the way, it would have been a good idea to flatten the ground underneath. If you really want to build your foundation around the huge tree that's in the middle of it, all sorts of ways you can do it, but there are certain rules that will make your life work more easily, including understanding the natural laws like the law of cause and effect. So when you put those two things together, when love and law work together, and this is the part I found interesting because Troward talked a lot about this. He talks about, let me just see if I actually wrote down that quote. If you put those two things together, what you get, according to Mr. Troward, is a building not constructed from without, but self-forming by a principle of growth from within, under the guidance of a supreme wisdom, permeating the whole and conducting it stage by stage to ultimate completeness. Let me read that again, because that was all one sentence. Actually, it's just part of the sentence. That's Troward, all right. You have sentences that can go on for pages from these guys. What we get is a building not constructed from without, but self-forming by a principle of growth from within, under the guidance of a supreme wisdom, permeating the whole and conducting it stage by stage to ultimate completeness. Or as Ernest Holmes would have written, when we use our creative imagination in strong faith, it will create for us out of the one substance whatever we have formed in thought. In this way, man becomes a co-creator with God. So, we use our creative imagination in faith. What does that mean? That means that if I choose to see a world that works for everyone, if I choose to see the power and the beauty in someone I'm having trouble liking in the moment, or whose behavior I don't like, when I use my imagination and realize that I can look through the version of them that I am seeing in this moment in form, I can look through to the God within them. And I can call that forth. Because the only thing for that other person to be made of is the one substance we call God. Actually, in foundations, we actually call it God stuff. It's like Play-Doh. It's the only stuff there is to make anything out of. And so as I see the beauty and the power in you, even if you're not necessarily displaying it in the moment, even if you don't believe me when I say it's there, if I choose to see it and I use my imagination, my mind's eye, to see that good within you, because I know it's there, the divine will back me up and you will become a happier person. You will become a person more aware of your power. You will become a person who I can see the beauty in effortlessly. So it's not just saying, think of your first grade nemesis, that mean kid, and you're pretending now that person wasn't so bad. What I do instead is say their behavior was pretty bad. And I know they probably felt that way about me, but the teacher liked me better, so I must have been okay. That person was still God. And as I look back now, as I look to the version of it I have in front of me right now, I can call forth the good that is within them, and the relationship will change. First of all, I am not reacting to a bad person anymore. I am in relationship with the divine within them, and that can't help but be loving and compassionate and good. And so as we choose to be in relationship with what Ernest Holmes talks about as the power in the universe that honors our faith within it, what we don't have to do is tell people how to be. I don't have to tell people to be of a different faith or political persuasion or gender identity or sexual preference. I don't have to tell anyone any of that. All I have to do is trust in the divine within me to allow me to see their beauty, allow me to see where we are absolutely one. And it is true that we are one. Some of you know that I used to work for the Public Defender's Office, and there was a time when I was oblivious to it because I wasn't all that smart, but apparently at war with one of the attorneys. I had done some stuff that ticked him off, even though it was my job. Maybe I wasn't all that graceful about it, probably not. To the point where he lambasted me for bringing the wrong kind of pens. Now, come on. And unfortunately, in my naivete, I told him what I thought. I said, if the worst thing about this office is that we have a different kind of pens than the kind you prefer, then I think we're doing very well. Oh. And yet, as I realized that there was a problem here, and went to prayer and chose to use him as my homework, not by saying anything to him, but just by knowing that there was a peaceful place and a way for us to interact that was respectful. All of a sudden, one day, he shows up at my office door with a peace offering. It was a little leather Bible. And I practically cried in that moment because I'm like, oh, it works. He does want to be in a positive relationship. We can work together. And it worked really well. Until I realized he really wanted me to read it and learn something that he thought he knew and I didn't. We tried really hard, and in that moment, what I learned was I can choose to see the beauty in someone even as, we struggle to work together. Oddly enough, somebody decided they should transfer him. I didn't have to ask for it. Nobody had to ask for it. He got transferred to a job that was much easier and allowed him to kind of coast into retirement. And I got to do my job. My life is full of stories where if I cannot work with somebody, they get removed from my life in a way that both of us are happy. I'm not looking to see them, dropped off the edge of a cliff. That's not how this works. I don't have, the boys go take care of him. What I do is say the divine within me honors the divine within you such that I want you to have whatever it is that would make your heart happy. And then they get lifted up and out of my presence, which is fine with me too. See, we don't have to pretend that just because we love the divine in everybody that we can work with everybody. Or that we would like them to move in with us. Think of all of the people you know. Would you really want to be roommates with all of them? No. There are some people who shouldn't try to live together. And that's okay. Their lessons are elsewhere. Their life is elsewhere. Their good is elsewhere. There was somebody who came to me a while ago doing exactly what I asked, which is, if I have stepped on your toes, please come to me so we can talk about it. And so I was so grateful to see them show up at my door because I hadn't seen them in a while. And I was thinking, where'd they go? So that person was kind enough to come to me and explain that part of the reason they left was because he heard something I said about when people leave, we let them. He heard that as, too bad, so sad, get out. What I meant was, obviously not, get out. But it is an acceptance that I get to create the world I want, but so do they. They get to have the power to create the world that suits them. And if they are going to be better served with their minister who is not me, then me and my bloated nothingness need to get out of the way and get over my little self. So if somebody gets called to come in here, I trust that they will bring their wisdom with them and their common sense with them and allow this to be their place if it is their place. But it is not, we don't proselytize. You will never see a religious scientist at your door on a Saturday morning. Why? Because what are we going to say? Good morning, you're perfect, don't change. Unless you also brought me coffee and a donut, do not get me up in order to deal with that. I have bedhead. And I do not want to be seen. I mean, imagine what that would look like. Please don't. It would be really funny to do one day, but not with me. So here's the thing. Troward says that we take this building and we build on it more and more according to natural law. And what we're building is our own lives. What we're building is our community. And the way he talks about it, actually Gene Houston in the Introduction to Science of Mind says it even better. It, meaning this teaching, shows us how to stop boring God by waking up to the fact that we are here in God's school to learn the principles of world making and the evolving of self and society. It shows us how to stop boring God by waking up to the fact that we are here in God's school to learn the principles of world making. We're not here for underwater basket weaving. We are here to do world making and how to evolve ourselves and society. Now, you may or may not adore the way things are going today out in the great big world, or in your personal life, or in this center. What I can tell you is this was never meant to be the stopping point. Where you are now might be really good. You might have a good, strong handle on the fact that thou art that you are a beautiful, magnificent soul in human form here to create healing and good in your life. You might be doing really, really well at that. And there's even better in store for you as you continue to learn and evolve. This center is doing just fine, thank you very much. We're doing great. We're doing amazing work. I'm so excited about the stuff that we have been doing even all the way back to the last year and more beyond that. But it gets better. We can do more. We can be more, not because this is insufficient, but because there's more toys out there to play with. There's more good to do that will make us even happier than we are now. Are you willing to upgrade your life by maybe, say, 10%? Are you willing, do you think you could stand to be maybe 10% happier? Or to see the world with 10% more kids who feel loved? 10% more neighbors that actually know each other's names? I'm halfway there. Well, 3/4 of the way. Maybe we're willing to be 10% spending more time being joy-filled as we do compassionate work for our equals, not because we're fixing them, but because someone has expressed a need and it sounds like fun. Maybe in this country we're willing to spend 10% more time actually talking to each other. Maybe we're willing to build a world that works for everyone and have that conversation 10% more of the time. According to Troward, that is why we are here. According to Gene Houston, who wrote the introduction to our textbook. According to Ernest Holmes, what he says is about in his chapter, What the Mystics Have Taught, is that we are meant to, little by little, bit by bit, grow in our joy and our faith until we are living in what he calls the kingdom of heaven, which is an internal heaven. The way he writes about it is this: they, meaning the mystics, those who are co-creating consciously, which pretty much means all y'all, have agreed that the soul is on a pathway of experience, that is, of self-discovery, that it is on its way back to its Father's house, and that every soul will ultimately reach its heavenly home. We are all on the pathway of self-discovery. Each of us has a pathway that is unique to us. Each of us can share tools back and forth, but each of us is already on the pathway. The pathway, all pathways, no matter which way around the mountain you go, leads to what he calls the Father's house. Some people call that nirvana. Some people call it waking up. Some people call it enlightenment. Some people call it heaven. Some of us call it utopia here on earth. It is that place where we live from our joy. And the third promise is this: we are all going to live in that perfection, in form. We already live there in the one mind. But we have the ability to, and maybe even the responsibility to, live in heaven right here and now. Using natural laws to move ourselves forward and evolve, we get to create the world that works for everyone. It is happening. It has been going on for some time. I know the news, most 24-hour news cycles have to come up with, hi, I'm here from Littletown, USA, where no bombs have gone off. We have to come up with something a little bit more exciting to get the advertisers to buy in, yes? So they're not going to tell you how many puppies were born healthy today. They're not going to do that kind of reporting. But if you look beyond that, if you do the research, you'll find we are becoming a far more peaceful, far more rich planet. War and violence are no longer accepted as the necessary answer. It used to be that if one person badmouths another one's mama, it's not that they're playing basketball, it's that they're about to go to a duel. And that was the only honorable way to deal with any affront to my dignity. That's just not okay anymore. I have not seen people out there with pistols at dawn at 12 paces in my entire life. Now that may be because it happens at dawn and I'm not going outside at dawn. But I also haven't heard it on the news. And I haven't misplaced any friends that, suddenly they're not there anymore because they just lost a duel. That's less than 100 years ago. Now, we resolve our differences, and if you're smack talking, you better be on a basketball court. And it's really hard to keep a straight face while you're doing it. We are moving forward as a species. We are doing better as a species. There is a lot of work left to do. We are not out of places where we can improve. But in truth, this is what we came here to God's school to do, to evolve, to know the highest and best for all of us, to see it made into form, to see the beauty in each other and in ourselves. That is Thomas Troward's gift to Ernest Holmes, whose gift is to us. How to use both. How to do shepherd and stone, love and law. All of the different facets of God that are actually the one divine being that we all are. And it feels like I'm already heading into prayer, so let's just do that. And in this